Welcome back in part 2 of Sega. Anyways, let's continue about this topic.
With the arcade game market once again growing, Sega was one of the most recognized game brands at the end of the 1980s.
In the arcades, the company focused on releasing games to appeal to diverse tastes, including racing games and side-scrollers.
Sega released the Master System's successor, the Mega Drive, in Japan on October 29, 1988.
The launch was overshadowed by Nintendo's release of Super Mario Bros. 3 a week earlier.
Positive coverage from magazines Famitsu and Beat helped establish a following, with a letter launching a new publication dedicated to the console, but Sega shipped only 400,000 units in the first year. The Mega Drive struggled to compete against the Famicom and lagged behind Nintendo's Super Famicom and the TurboGrafx 16, made by NEC, in Japanese sales throughout the 16-bit era.
For the North American launch, where the console was renamed Genesis, Sega had no sales and marketing organization.
After Atari declined an offer to market the console in the region, Sega launched it through its own Sega of America subsidiary.
The Genesis was launched in New York City and Los Angeles on August 14, 1989, and in the rest of North America later that year.
The European version of the Mega Drive was released in September 1990. Former Atari executive and new Sega of America president Michael Katz developed a two-part strategy to build sales in North America.
The first part involved a marketing campaign to challenge Nintendo and emphasize the more arcade-like experience available on the Genesis, with slogans including, "Genesis does what Nintendo don't."
Since Nintendo owned the console rights to most arcade games of the time, the second part involved creating a library of games, which used the names and likenesses of celebrities, such as Michael Jackson's Moonwalker and Joe Montana Football.
Nonetheless, Sega had difficulty overcoming Nintendo's ubiquity in homes.
Sega of America sold only 500,000 Genesis units in its first year, half of Nakayama's goal. After the launch of the Genesis, Sega sought a new flagship line of releases to compete with Nintendo's Mario series.
Its new character, Sonic the Hedgehog, went on to feature in one of the best-selling video game franchises in history.
Sonic the Hedgehog began with a tech demo created by Yuji Naka involving a fast-moving character rolling in a hall through a winding tube. This was fleshed out with Naoto Oshima's character design and levels, conceived by designer Hirokazu Yasuhara.
Sonic's color was chosen to match Sega's cobalt blue logo. His shoes were inspired by Michael Jackson's boots, and his personality by Bill Clinton's can-do attitude.
Nakayama hired Tom Kalinske as CEO of Sega of America in mid-1990, and Katz departed soon after.
Kalinske knew little about the video game market, but surrounded himself with industry-savvy advisors.
A believer in the razor and blades business model, he developed the 4-point plan, cut the price of the Genesis, create a US team to develop games targeted at the American market, expand the aggressive advertising campaigns, and replace the bundle game Altered Beast with Sonic the Hedgehog.
The Japanese board of directors disapproved, but it was approved by Nakayama, who told Kalinske, "I hired you to make the decisions for Europe and the Americas, so go ahead and do it."
In large part due to the popularity of Sonic the Hedgehog, the Genesis outsold its main competitor, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, SNES, in the United States nearly 2-1 during the 1991 holiday season.
By January 1992, Sega controlled 65% of the 16-bit console market.
Sega outsold Nintendo for 4 consecutive Christmas seasons due to the Genesis head start, lower price, and a larger library, compared to the SNES at release.
Nintendo's dollar share of the US 16-bit market dropped from 60% at the end of 1992 to 37% at the end of 1993. Sega claimed 55% of all 16-bit hardware sales during 1994, and the SNES outsold the Genesis from 1995 through 1997.
In 1990, Sega launched the Game Gear, a handheld console, to compete against Nintendo's Game Boy.
The Game Gear was designed as a portable version of the Master System and featured a full-color screen, in contrast to the monochrome Game Boy screen.
Due to its short battery life, lack of original games, and weak support from Sega, the Game Gear did not surpass the Game Boy, having sold approximately 11 million units.
Sega launched the Mega CD in Japan on December 1, 1991, initially retailing at 49,800 yen.
The add-on uses CD-ROM technology.
Further features include a second, faster processor, vastly expanded system memory, a graphics chip that performs scaling and rotation similar to the company's arcade games, and another sound chip.
In North America, it was renamed the Sega CD and launched on October 15, 1992, with a retail price of US $299.
It was released in Europe as the Mega CD in 1993.
The Mega CD sold only 100,000 units during its first year in Japan, falling well below expectations. Throughout the early 1990s, Sega largely continued its success in arcades around the world.
In 1992 and 1993, the new Sega Model 1 arcade system board showcased in-house development studio Sega AM2's Virtua Racing and Virtua Fighter. The first 3D fighting game, which, though expensive, played a crucial role in popularizing 3D polygonal graphics.
In addition, complex simulator equipment like the rotational R360 kept Sega competing with machines by rival arcade companies, including Taito.
New official region-specific distributors and manufacturers, including the UK's Deep Leisure, allowed Sega to sell its machines outside of Japan with ease.
Sega's domestic operations division also opened hundreds of family-oriented suburban Sega World amusement arcades in Japan during this period, as well as large over 18s Shido facilities in the high-profile urban areas of Roppongi and Ikebukuro.
In 1993, this success was mirrored in overseas territories with the openings of several large, branded entertainment centers such as Sega Virtua Land in Luxor, Las Vegas.
In 1994, Sega generated a revenue of 354.032 billion yen or $3,464 million, equivalent to $7,525 million in 2025. In 1993, the American media began to focus on the mature content of certain video games, such as Night Trap, for the Sega CD and the Genesis version of Midway's Mortal Kombat.
This This came at a time when Sega was capitalizing on its image as an edgy company with attitude, and this reinforced that image.
To handle this, Sega instituted the United States' first video game rating system, the Video Game Rating Council, VRC, for all its systems.
Ratings ranged from the family-friendly GA rating to the more mature rating of MA-13, and the adults-only rating of MA-17.
Executive Vice President of Nintendo of America Howard Lincoln was quick to point out in the United States congressional hearings in 1993 that Night Trap was not rated at all.
Senator Joe Lieberman called for another hearing in February 1994 to check progress toward a rating system for video game violence.
After the hearings, Sega proposed the universal adoption of the VRC. After objections by Nintendo and others, Sega took a role in forming the Entertainment Software Rating Board. Sega began work on the Genesis successor, the Sega Saturn, more than 2 years before showcasing it at the Tokyo Toy Show in June 1994.
According to former Sega of America producer Scott Bayless, Nakayama became concerned about the 1994 release of the Atari Jaguar, and that the Saturn would not be available until the next year.
As a result, Nakayama decided to have a second console released to market by the end of 1994.
Sega began to develop the 32X, a Genesis add-on which would serve as a less expensive entry into the 32-bit era.
The 32X would not be compatible with the Saturn, but would play Genesis games.
Sega released the 32X on November 21, 1994 in North America, December 3, 1994 in Japan, and January 1995 in PAL territories, and was sold at less than half of the Saturn's launch price.
After the holiday season, interest in the 32X rapidly declined. Sega released the Saturn in Japan on November 22, 1994.
Virtua Fighter, a port of the popular arcade game, sold at a nearly 1-to-1 ratio with the Saturn at launch and was crucial to the system's early success in Japan.
Sega's initial shipment of 200,000 Saturn units sold out on the first day, and it was more popular than the PlayStation, made by Sony in Japan.
In March 1995, Sega of America CEO Tom Kalinske announced that the Saturn would be released in the US on Saturday, September 2, 1995, advertised as Saturn Day.
Sega executives in Japan mandated an early launch to give the Saturn an advantage over the PlayStation.
At the first Electronic Entertainment Expo, E3, in Los Angeles, on May 11, 1995, Kalinske revealed the release price and that Sega had shipped 30,000 Saturns to Toys R Us, packages, electronics boutique, and software etc. for immediate release.
A byproduct of the surprise launch was the provocation of retailers not included in Sega's rollout. KB Toys, in particular, decided to no longer stock its products in response. The Saturn's release in Europe also came before the previously announced North American date on July 8, 1995.
Within 2 days of the PlayStation's American launch on September 9, 1995, the PlayStation sold more units than the Saturn.
Within its first year, the PlayStation secured over 20% of the US video game market.
The console's high price point, surprise launch, and difficulty handling polygonal graphics were factors in its lack of success.
Sega also underestimated the continued popularity of the Genesis. 16-bit sales accounted for 64% of the market in 1995.
Despite capturing 43% of the US market dollar share and selling more than 2 million Genesis units in 1995. Kalinske estimated that, if prepared for demand, another 300,000 could have been sold.
Sega announced that Shoichiro Rimajiri had been appointed chairman and CEO of Sega of America in July 1996, while Kalinske left Sega after September 30 of that year.
A former Honda executive, Rimajiri had been involved with Sega of America since joining Sega in 1993.
The company also announced that Rosen and Nakayama had resigned from their positions at Sega of America, though both remained with Sega.
Bernie Stoller, a former executive at Sony Computer Entertainment of America, became Sega of America's executive vice president in charge of product development and third-party relations.
Stoller was not supportive of the Saturn, believing its hardware was poorly designed. While Stoller had said the Saturn is not our future at E3 1997, he continued to emphasize the quality of its games, and later reflected that we tried to wind it down as cleanly as we could for the consumer.
At Sony, Stoller had opposed the localization of certain Japanese PlayStation games that he felt would not represent the system well in North America.
He advocated a similar policy for the Saturn, generally blocking 2D arcade games and role-playing games from release, although he later sought to distance himself from this stance.
Other changes included a softer image in Sega's advertising, including removing the Sega screen and holding press events for the education industry.
Sega partnered with GE to develop the Sega Model 2 arcade system board, building on 3D technology in the arcade industry at the time.
This led to several successful arcade games, including Daytona USA, launched in a limited capacity in late 1993 and worldwide in 1994.
Other popular games included Virtua Cop, Sega Rally Championship, and Virtua Fighter 2.
Virtua Fighter and Virtua Fighter 2 became Sega's best-selling arcade games of all time, surpassing its previous record holder Outrun.
There was also a technological arms race between Sega and Namco during this period, driving the growth of 3D gaming. Beginning in 1994, Sega launched a series of indoor theme parks in Japan under a concept dubbed Amusement Theme Park, including Joy Palace parks, sited in urban Tokyo locations such as Yokohama and Abela.
A rapid overseas rollout was planned, with at least 100 locations across the world proposed to be opened by 2000, however only 2. Sega World London and Sega World Sydney would ultimately materialize in September 1996 and March 1997, respectively.
Following on from difficulties faced in setting up theme parks in the United States, Sega established the GameWorks chain of urban entertainment centers in a joint venture with DreamWorks SKG and Universal Studios during March 1997. In 1995, Sega partnered with Atlas to launch Sprint Club, Purikura, an arcade photo sticker machine that produces selfie photos.
Atlas and Sega introduced Purikura in February 1995, initially at Game Arcades. before expanding to other popular culture locations such as fast food shops, train stations, karaoke establishments, and bowling alleys.
Puripura became a popular form of entertainment among youths across East Asia, laying the foundations for modern selfie culture.
By 1997, about 47,000 Puripura machines had been sold, earning Sega an estimated 25 billion yen, 173 million pounds, or $283 million, equivalent to $568 million in 2025 from Puripura sales that year.
Various other similar Puripura machines appeared from other manufacturers, with Sega controlling about half of the market in 1997. Sega also made forays in the PC market with a 1995 establishment of Sega Soft, which was tasked with creating original Saturn and PC games.
From 1994 to 1999, Sega also participated in the arcade pinball market when it took over Data East's pinball division, renaming it Sega Pinball.
In January 1997, Sega announced its intentions to merge with the Japanese toy maker Bandai.
The merger, planned as a $1 billion stock swap, whereby Sega would wholly acquire Bandai, was set to form a company known as Sega Bandai Limited.
Though it was to be finalized in October of that year, it was called off in May after growing opposition from Bandai's mid-level executives.
Bandai instead agreed to a business alliance with Sega.
As a result of Sega's deteriorating financial situation, Nakayama resigned as Sega president in January 1998 in favor of Rimajiri.
Nakayama's resignation may have in part been due to the failure of the merger, as well as Sega's 1997 performance.
Stoller became CEO and president of Sega of America. After the launch of the Nintendo 64 in the US during 1996, sales of the Saturn and its games fell sharply in much of the West.
The PlayStation outsold the Saturn 3-1 in the US in 1997, and the latter failed to gain a foothold in Europe and Australia, where the Nintendo 64 would not release until March 1997.
After several years of declining profits, Sega had a slight increase in the fiscal year ended March 1997, partly driven by increase in arcade revenue, while outperforming Nintendo during the midterm period.
However, in the fiscal year ending March 1998, Sega suffered its first financial loss since its 1988 listing on the Tokyo Stock Exchange as both a parent company and a corporation as a whole.
In the company's 1998 year-end report, Irimajiri placed the blame for these losses on the failure to transition from the Genesis to the Saturn in North America and Sega Enterprises, covering the debts of Sega of America.
Shortly before the announcement of the losses, Sega discontinued the Saturn in North America to prepare for the launch of its successor, the Dreamcast, releasing remaining games in low quantities.
The decision to discontinue the Saturn effectively left the North American home console market without Sega games for over a year, with most of its activity in the country coming from arcade divisions.
The Saturn lasted longer in some Europe territories and particularly Japan, with it notably outperforming the Nintendo 64 in the latter.
Nonetheless, Irimajiri confirmed in an interview with Japanese newspaper Daily Yomiuri that Saturn development would stop at the end of 1998 and games would continue to be produced until mid-1999.
lifetime sales of 9.26 million units, the Saturn is retrospectively considered a commercial failure in much of the world.
While Sega had success with a Model 3 arcade board and titles like Virtua Fighter 3, Sega's arcade division struggled in the West during the late 1990s.
On the other hand, Sega's arcade divisions were more successful in Asia, with Sega's overall arcade revenues increasing year-on-year throughout the late 1990s. But it was not enough to offset the significant declining revenues of Sega's home consumer divisions. We will continue more about Sega in Part 3, so stay tuned.